Welcome to this video article where I'm going to do a story analysis of the Ray Bradbury story A Sound of Thunder using the 5-step hero's journey. This is an ancillary video to go with my series on how to write short stories. I decided that the analysis videos that I do would not go into the numbering on the how to write short story series, but it very much goes hand in hand with that. So, A Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury. You'll find it in a book called A Sound of Thunder, weirdly enough, and other stories. It is collected in other collections too. This is a relatively recent US release, I think 2013. There's 32 Bradbury stories in here, and there's 3 or 4 of my favourites in here, including this one and The Foghorn. But you'll find it in other Bradbury collections. So it doesn't matter where you find it. If you've not read the story, read the story and come back to the video because there's going to be massive spoilers. Just quick reminder of the 5 steps of the minimum viable hero's journey. There's the implied ordinary world. There's an efficient call to adventure to set the stakes. There's a distinct threshold crossing, there's a death and rebirth ordeal or resurrection, and there's a reward or return with the elixir. Let's just have a quick story overview of A Sound of Thunder. The main character is called Eccles, and he's a flawed hero, so it's not a traditional use of the hero's journey, but the minimum viable hero's journey still applies. He goes on a time safari, goes back in time to hunt a T-Rex. There's an anti-gravity path that's been established in the past to stop the hunters. There's 3 hunters and 2 safari guides to stop them touching anything on the world 60 million years ago. But when they encounter the T-Rex, it's huge beyond Eccles' conception, and he panics and he stumbles away. They send him back to the machine, the safari guides do, but he strays off the path in his panic. When they return to their time, there is mud on his boots, which they've not realised. They realised he strayed from the path, but they didn't realise there was mud on his boots and a dead butterfly was in the mud, and the election result that's set up in the start of the story has changed, and their world has changed because of Eccles straying from the path and killing the dead butterfly. So let's look at the 5 steps in a little bit more detail. The implied ordinary world. So Eccles is a thrill seeker who has killed every kind of game, and he's looking for the ultimate game, which is to go back in time with Time Safari Inc. to kill a T-Rex. It's a technologically advanced society. Obviously, they've got time travel, so it is technologically advanced. There's been a recent election, and the winner, a candidate called Keith, beat out a potential nightmare president. Just a couple of lines of conversation, or dialogue rather, but it's important. And the other thing is used, which is really interesting in the implied ordinary world, is there's a sign for the Time Safari Company, like saying this is who we are, what we do, and we'll come back to that at the end of the analysis. Efficient call to adventure. Now, remember the hero's journey steps in any length of story, whether a short form story like we're looking at, or a long form story like a movie or a novel, whatever it is, they're guidelines, they're not a blueprint. So you don't have to go bang, 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 bang in order. And I say that because Eccles arrives, he's already committed to the safari. He's already decided, he's seen the advertisements and decided, this is what I need. This is the next level of thrill for me. There's several pieces of conversation through the story that reiterates this, where he's been on safaris before and killed elephants and blah, blah, blah. The interesting thing they do here, an interesting reversal, is the people at Time Safari Inc. test his resolve and try to get him to quit, try to frighten him to walk away by saying, he asks if they can guarantee he'll come back, and they say the only thing they can guarantee is that he'll meet the dinosaur. They can't guarantee he'll come back or he'll survive the encounter. And they say something like, in the year already, several of the safari guides have already been killed. So there's an interesting reversal here where they try to get him to change his mind about the call to adventure. So that was quite a cool little twist on this point. Distinct threshold crossing. They go to the time machine and they journey from 2055 to 60 million years earlier. That's obviously a special world now, and it's the primordial wilderness. There's also this crossing is dramatized in the journey, and they talk about the anti-gravity path and what could happen, what could be the possible consequences if they step off the path. And there's an interesting little section where the dialogue's about they go back to find a dinosaur that's about to get killed, and they kill it 30 seconds, 45 seconds before it's due to die anyway, and they leave it there so that it will rot and decompose, and that the animals, insects, etc., will feed on it and break it down, so that nothing's changed from that animal's future. So they're not killing an animal that would have gone on to mate and have a family, anything like that. So, and they say, Eccles says, well, what happens if we kill the wrong animal? And they say they don't know for sure, but they say the compound interest effects of the changes to the timeline could be massive. So it's a really interesting piece of, it's almost exposition, but it's dramatized by them trying to make the point, the safari guides, that it could change the world and who knows what will happen, so on and so forth. So they don't want to kill the wrong animal. So what they do is, one of the safari guides goes back to the time period earlier, watches the animals, hits the animal that's going to die, that they're going to target, with a charge which has got red paint. So it sprays red paint all over it, so they know that the right animal is identified. And he is the one who lays the anti-gravity path, from which they are warned, do not stray from the path. Death and rebirth ordeal. There's a face-to-face encounter with the T-Rex. Eccles is terrified because of the size of it, doesn't believe it can be killed. They send him back to the machine and he's panicking, and they're wearing like astronauts helmets because they're trying not to bring their atmosphere and breathe it in the past, because that might have a change to the timeline by doing something to insects, vegetation, whatever. But Eccles steps off the path, and there are two deaths here. The first one is the death of Eccles' self-image as a fearless hunter, because he is literally terrified. And there's the first sound of thunder in the story is the T-Rex roaring. But the second death is when Eccles steps off the path, he stands on a butterfly and it's embedded in the mud on his shoes, and the death of that butterfly will kill their timeline. There's actually a third death that I've not mentioned as well. There's a short section where the safari guides say, because someone's come off the path, which they've guaranteed the government, who don't like them doing it, they've guaranteed the government that no one would, they might lose their licenses, and it's going to cost them hundreds of £1,000s. And Eccles says, I'll write a cheque for £100,000. Obviously, in 1955, these sums of money were astronomical. They are not so much now. If you were writing this kind of story now, we'd be talking about maybe £10 million, dollars rather, would be the cost of going on the safari. But so there are deaths. One, the death of Eccles' self-image, and one, the death of the butterfly, that happen in the ordeal. And then the T-Rex, of course, is killed by the other hunters and the safari guides. And then return from the, let's just say, return with the elixir. They return to their own time period, but it's subtly changed. It smells a little different. It tastes a little different. the Time Safari Inc. sign, which is, I think it's mentioned on page 1 of the story, is spelled differently. The language has changed. The guy who is behind the counter, who welcomes them back, tells them that Deutsche, the bad guy, has won the election. And that's a second interesting contrast, because at the start of the story, the guy behind the counter who takes Eccles' money says, oh, it's a good job that Keith won and not Deutsche, because Deutsche would have been a terrible person. But now he says, oh, it's great that Deutsche won, because he's a proper president who'll stand up and do the right thing for everyone, not like that weak, I forget the terminology that Bradbury used, but implied a weak, soppy, soft candidate who no one likes. And so you get 3 things that distinctly communicate the fact that standing on the butterfly has changed the world in quite a substantial way. So those 3 things are, it smells differently and it looks a bit different in terms of lighting and colouring. The Time Safari Inc. sign is spelled differently. The language has changed. And then the guy behind the counter is pleased that Deutsche has won and not Keith. Eccles has a realisation that his blundering and his panic has caused a terrible result. And he tries to say, can we not go back and correct it? Can we not go back and correct it? But they've already set that up as not being able to be done, because he asks what happens if we meet ourselves in the past. And the Safari Guide tells him that if that happens, time won't let it happen because it creates a paradox. So he says we kind of slip away from each other and we don't ever cross our own paths. And Travis, the Safari Guide, picks up his rifle and cocks it, and then there's a second sound of thunder. We don't see anything. The story literally ends. It literally drives out and said there was a sound of thunder, and we're left to intuit that Eccles has been shot by Travis, and that's the story ended. So although Eccles is a flawed hero, Bradbury did some interesting things, and the 5 steps of the minimum viable hero's journey still work to outline the story. So it gives you an example that if you've got a story where there's a flawed hero, and in short stories you're a lot freer to do things like that you can subvert the conventions of the hero's journey to have events happen like they happen in this story. So I'll just give a quick summary before we close out. So even though Eccles is a flawed hero and one who fails his ordeal and basically runs away or is sent away from it, the minimum viable hero's journey still works perfectly to create a working spine for this short story. A key learning, story characters who take the hero's journey can fail at different points. If anyone has this reference, I'm convinced that in one of the versions of Chris Vogler's book, The Writer's Journey, there's been 4 editions. There is a line which says every character is the hero of their own journey. And I've read it 2 or 3 times since to try, and I've never found that line again. So if anyone's got a page number and an edition number, please leave it in the comments or email me and let me know, because I would love to take a screen capture of that for something that I'm working on. But when you come on to more nuanced, detailed, sophisticated stories, novella, novel length, one of the ways that the hero's journey can be used is you can apply it to each character. They are the hero of their own journey. Now, they don't, in a story, they don't have to go through a complete arc. A specific character might only go through 2 steps of their hero's journey. It's also a good way if you have a story where you've got the antagonist isn't a bad guy, and I'm using, as I've done in previous videos, I'm using terminology that's very straightforward so that you understand what I'm trying to say. But the antagonist might be someone who just has a slightly different goal from the hero, but he's not a bad person, but he may fail because he's got character flaws. So that's a good way in stories like that, where the antagonist is trying to get that. So like romance would be a great example. If you've got two characters who are both vying to win the love of a third character, the character who fails doesn't have to be bad in inverted commas. He may just have some character flaws that cause him to basically fall off the hero's journey's path at some stage and not go through to the resolution. So that is a key learning for anyone using Hero's Journey as a story outlining structure tool in work of whatever length. Okay, next episode, I've really enjoyed this. So the next episode, I'm going to do another minimum viable hero's journey analysis. I'm going to do a series of these with very different stories. The next one is a short story called The Ledge by Stephen King, which is from his collection The Night Shift, which is his earliest collection of short stories. If you're going to write short stories, and I've laid out in other videos why I think writing short stories is the quickest way to find your writing process. That collection of early short stories, and maybe one or two of the shorter early Bachman books, are really worth having a read of to see what early Stephen King was doing, and then read some of his later stuff and see how he developed. And he developed quite quickly. So Carrie is quite a basic book, and after Carrie, I think the next three books were The Shining, Salem's Lot, and I've forgotten the third one. But those three books were all substantially at a higher level than Carrie or King's earlier work. The Stand, that was the one I was thinking of. So anyway, the next one I'm going to analyse is going to be The Ledge by Stephen King from The Night Shift. If you want to contact me, paul@deliberate-practice.com is my email address. I also have a resource for aspiring and or frustrated fiction writers, which I call The Vault, but it's writing-vault.com. I'll put the link in the description to this video. And in a week or so, I'll release a video showing something that's going into The Vault that, if you're looking to outline stories, will be an enormous help for you, and it will be free to people who've subscribed to The Vault. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't hesitate to email me or leave a comment, but I don't see the comments as quickly as I see emails, and I will see you in the next video.